Welcome to Gardening Questions Answered. This month we're talking about houseplants. And my name is Susan Giant. I'm a community horticulture educator and I lead the Master Gardener Volunteer Program. And today I have two wonderful Master Gardener volunteers with me, Lynn Jenny and Cecile Jones. So let's get started. Lynn is going to start us off, and she's going to talk about indoor-outdoor plants, those plants that, spend some of their time inside and some of their time outside. So,
hello, everybody. First of all, a lot of us like to put our houseplants outside thinking we're giving them such great environment, and that is true, but it's very important to, on the putting them out and bringing them in, that you follow a few little rules that will keep your plants healthy. So why do some of my plants lose leaves when I bring them in for the winter? Well, the big answer to that is stress. It's a completely different environment when they're outside versus when they're inside. All of the needs of the plant are changing drastically. So one of the things, and I believe Susan's going to talk about this in a little bit, but one of them, when you bring your house plants inside, it's very important that you check for insects. This is probably, we're just talking about this, one of the biggest problems when you bring plants in. You want to make sure you clean them outside, get the bugs off. If it's just spraying with water or wiping off some bugs that may be on it or in the soil, it's something you really have to do. And of course, you have to bring them in before the first frost. Houseplants can take a little bit of colder weather, maybe 50s, I'd say, but you do not want to leave them out after frost. They'll be done. So you want to, when you bring them in, as I have here, is you want to try to match the growing conditions, both temperature and humidity. Sometimes it's not as easy to do, and your plants sometimes may not look quite as healthy as they are in the summer. But if you follow all our instructions through this video, you'll probably have a good chance of keeping them healthy enough through the winter. And remember too, in the winter, they're kind of in a slow down phase. They're not in a heavy growth phase. So don't fear. So putting them outside, of course, after the last frost, you obviously don't want them ever to be exposed to frost. And similarly to what we do when we are seed starting, it's a good idea to harden them off. So you put them out for a little while, get them used to the outdoor environment, and maybe for a week, at least a few days, try to get them used to the new environment outside. And as we always say, right plant, right place. So you're not going to put a low light plant in full sun all day long. It will definitely fry. You will get burn marks on your leaves. And back to hardening off, you could put them outside sort of in a dappled shade or shady area for the first few days just to get them accustomed to the outdoors. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the light requirements for your house plants. And how do you know if they are getting enough light? Again, we talk about right plant, right place. So if you are everybody thinks you put them in a window and all is good. Well, sometimes your window does not have enough light, and you will see symptoms of poor growth and insufficient light by the plants getting leggy. They get these long stem growth between the leaves. Obviously, that's what legginess is. They lean towards the light. They'll lean right over to your window, trying to seek out the light. The leaves could be turning to pale green or even yellow a little bit, although there's other reasons they could be going yellow, but they will get kind of anemic if they don't have enough light. And interestingly, those plants that are variegated, that have variegated leaves, sometimes they will revert to a solid green leaf. And so without the sun, they aren't able to have that white variegated part of the leaf. Okay, so here's an example of this plant is in the window, and you would think it would be a sufficient light, but that overhang is preventing the light from getting onto the plant in a sufficient amount. So keep that in mind when you put your plants in the window. Are there trees blocking your window? you know, pardon me, and, you know, east, south, west, north, whatever exposure you've got there depends on what the plant requirements are gonna be. Do I keep saying right plant, right place a lot? Well, is the motto. It's the important thing. So when you're bringing your plants in from outside, you want to try to match what the light exposure had been outside, and they'll have the best chance of doing well inside. So we wanted to give you a few examples of some low light plants. So we have an aspidistra here, an iron plant. This is called a mother-in-law plant in my book. It can do very well in low light. Pothos are very popular for low light areas. Snake plants as well, almost, and ZZ plants. I once saw a study where they put a ZZ plant in total darkness for 100 days and it did just fine. So that's a very low light plant. Okay. So medium light plants, our examples here are amaryllis, which many of you might be growing right now this season. The jade plant, which is very popular, a monstera, which I believe could be in the, I'm not sure if it's the philodendron family or the pothos, but it has these split leaves like that. So that does well in a low light area, and spider plants as well. And then you've got highlight plants. Those are that need very strong sun. Cactus, obviously succulents, they need the light. They're tropical, so they are going to want a lot of light. Citrus plants, citrus trees are going to need a lot of light as well. That's where they were grown, and that's what they need, a lot of light. Orchids, if you want them to bloom, they need the light, and poinsettias as well. So if you don't have the right window, the light coming in through your windows, obviously we can use supplemental lighting, and it can be anything from a single lamp with a grow light bulb in it, or a full setup with, you know, racks to hold all of your plants. And there's another single bulb.
So now we're going to turn it over to Steele, and she's going to talk about watering.
A frequently asked question about watering is, how often should I water my houseplants? Well, you can go by looks and say, oh, it's wilting, it needs water, but that's not always the case. Sometimes your plant will wilt because you've given it too much water. So what are the steps for success? Well, you need to use tender loving care, not too much care or TMC. You obviously need the good quality potting soil and the right kind of soil for the right plant that you have in your pot. So the potting soil for a cacti is different for an orchid, it's different for a succulent, and it's different for a regular houseplant. Most of the houseplants that Lynn showed in her section of this presentation. And you want to make sure that there's at least an inch or at least a half-inch drainage hole in the center of the pot. I've seen a lot of like TikTok and Instagram things where they say, oh, just fill the pot with the rocks in the bottom and then that'll be your drainage. Well, it doesn't really work because the rocks they won't absorb the water. So the water table in your pot will increase, and that'll mean that your roots will be bogged down or clogged in wet soil, and that could lead to root rot, and that's not good for your plant. So please don't put rocks or other materials in the bottom of your plant. So the most common watering problem is overwatering. You know, people say, oh, let me put it on a calendar. Every 7 days I need to water my plants. Well, that's not necessarily the case because it depends on the light, the amount of light that the plant receives. It depends on the temperature of your room. Obviously, the plants will need more water in the summer than in the winter. So there's a lot of various factors. So what you want to do instead is to stick your finger in the soil at least 2 inches below and feel for the moistness of the soil. And if it's a large pot, use a dowel. I use chopsticks. Stick it all the way in the bottom. And when you pull it up, if the bottom is very dry, you'll feel it. And so that needs more water. And make sure that when you water that pot, that if you have excess water running off in the saucer, don't let it sit there overnight. Make sure that you pour that water because you don't want it to sit there it'll just lead to root rot and problems for your plant. How do you water your plants then? So the most common way, of course, is top watering. You water from the top with your, pitcher or pot of water, or you can take your plants, put them in the sink with water and let the water absorb. You fill that larger bucket or saucer with water and let it absorb, and let it stay there for a while, an hour or two, and then pour off the excess water. So those are the two most common ways to water the plants. So a problem with watering is soluble salt buildup. What happens is there are minerals dissolved in the water that start to concentrate as the water evaporates from the potting mix. And that can inhibit the water intake by your roots. It could also damage your root tips. And the symptoms include reduced growth of the plant, or you could have brown leaf tips, or you could have the lower leaves of your plant dropping off, or it could wilt. So what you can do to avoid it is to use mineral water. You can collect rainwater, or you could use water from a dehumidifier and use that to water your plants, or let the water sit in your watering can overnight, because that'll allow the minerals to settle down in the bottom, and use that water except for the last 2 inches in the bottom of the watering can. And the next question is, how often should I fertilize my houseplants? Well, fertilizing companies want you to use a lot of their fertilizer. So they'll say, oh, every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, but no, you wanna make sure that you fertilize it during the growth phase, which is during the spring and summer. And you want to remember that less is more, because when you use a lot of fertilizers, there's salts in there and you could burn the roots and harm the plants.
All right, thanks so much, Cecile. And so now we're going to turn to pests, which is my favorite part of any presentation. So what are the most common pests on houseplants, and what can I do about them? Well, I came up with 7 different pests that are common: aphids, fungus gnats, mealybugs, scale, spider mites, thrips, and whiteflies. They're all really small, and they're all difficult to control. We're going to run through them and talk about what they look like, the damage they cause, and what you can do about them. So we'll start with aphids. So here's a picture of some aphids. A great way to, they come in, they get bigger as they grow. And you can tell them because they have these 2 little tailpipes you can kind of see in the picture sticking out of their rear end. So that's how you can kind of tell it's an aphid. Aphids, their populations will explode. All you need is 1 female, and you can have a whole colony in a couple of days. So it's really important to check your plants before you bring them inside, because most aphids are coming in on plants. That's the most common way, because most aphids, there are winged aphids, but most of them aren't flying around. So they're coming in on material you're bringing into your house. So that's why you really need to check them. Aphids also really like plants that are highly fertilized. So fertilizing less will make plants less attractive to aphids. So if you do have aphids, what you can do is spray them with water and knock them off, as most aphids are just walking around. They don't have they're not very fast, and it takes some time, and it's difficult for them to get back up on the plant to feed. And you'll have to do that more than once, because you'll probably miss some. They'll be hiding, in the corner of the leaf veins, and so it's something you're gonna have to repeat. And if it's, spring or summer, there's lots of things that love to eat aphids. In fact, I was just talking with Lynn. She said she had plants that had aphids, and all of the multicolored Asian lady beetles in her house flocked to her plants and were acting as biocontrol in her house. But that's something you also do. You take the plant outside and have those lady beetles and late spring come and eat the aphids. So the second pest we're going to talk about is fungus gnats. Now, this is the most common houseplant pest, and that's because we're really bad at not overwatering our plants. And since it's so dry in the wintertime, you have to drop the water more often, so there's more standing water around. And the larvae feed on the plant roots and fungus in the soil. And when the soil is moist all the time, there's more fungus to feed upon, and they will lay their eggs. As long as the soil is moist, they're going to lay their eggs in it, and they're going to have those larvae. You'll see the adults fly around. You can put out yellow sticky traps to kind of monitor for them and trap them, but it's not going to control them. So how you can manage that is just keeping your soil surface dry. So perhaps watering from below, putting it in the sink and letting the water absorb. Or also, you can cover your soil with a layer of sand or perlite, just a 1/4 inch, and that will keep the soil surface dry. and then the fungus gnats won't be laying their eggs, and then so, they won't be reproducing. So really just not overwatering, not leaving standing water in the dishes will reduce your populations of fungus gnats. So our next pest are mealybugs. Now these have piercing, sucking mouth parts. So they're sucking out a lot of plant liquid, and then they're also excreting it in something called honeydew. So your plants may become covered with a sticky substance. These are most common on long-term plants. I've seen them most commonly on citrus plants. They really love citrus. They're really hard to control because if you look at this picture, we have these kind of large mealybugs that are easy to see, but there's also all these really tiny ones. So if you're going about scraping and squishing them with hand or your cotton swab, if you're not extremely careful, you might miss all those little tiny ones that are on your plant, and they just get bigger and reproduce pretty quickly. So if you are mechanically removing them, make sure you look at the bottom of the leaves, between the soil and the pot, all those places where they're hiding. If you have a pretty severe infestation, one thing you can do is cut the plant back. Luckily, a lot of our houseplants regenerate fairly quickly, so cutting it back and then doing a very thorough job on a smaller plant is a lot easier than doing a whole big plant. And if you have a infestation that's just too much, you might have to get rid of the plant because they will move on to other plants. So our next pest is scale. Scale is very similar to mealybugs in that it has piercing, sucking mouth parts. They're more common on long-term plants. They have that honeydew that they're excreting, so there's sticky stuff on all your plant leaves. And how you want to get rid of them is the same. You're going to be scraping and squishing them. Most of them have a hard coating on their back, so you have to really scrape them off. They're not just going to fall off. Sometimes people don't even notice them. They think they're like bumps on the plant leaf or the plant stem. So you gotta be careful in looking for those as well. And they get into all little sneaky places. And yeah, if populations get too big, you might need to cut your plant back or just get rid of the plant. So this is my favorite pest. I love spider mites. They're lots of fun. So these is a really great picture of them, but they're about the size of a period in 12-point fonts. They're quite small. You can see them crawling around, but they're kind of hard to see. Most of them aren't noticed until they start producing webbing, and by that time their populations have gotten pretty large. Again, the same thing with aphids. One female will cause the entire population to explode. So that's all you need is that one female, and they have piercing, sucking mouth parts, so you're going to notice stippling on the leaves. So make sure you're checking your plants before you bring them inside. Spider mites were around a lot. They have really like dry conditions, so your house in the winter time when the heat's on and the house is dry is great environment for them. And since we had a pretty dry summer, they were all out this summer. So bring your plants and make sure you're cleaning them off. Really, the only thing you'd be able to do is wash them off and repeating. They really like to hide on the underside of leaves, especially where the veins meet, right under some plants have such large veins, they hide under them. So you're gonna have to continually wash them off until you get rid of them. Our next pest is called thrips. And so thrips, they are on this pepper leaf here. They look like little kind of dashes. They're very small. They have rasping mouth parts, so they leave irregular streaks and splotches on the leaves. And the adults, they fly. So they're not flying around like fungus gnats, but when they're disturbed, they will kind of fly to another leaf. Really important is early detection. Once you have them, it's really hard to get rid of. I had infestation on some indoor zinnias I was growing last winter to keep my office sunny and bright. And I tried to get them off every day and I failed. Eventually had to scrap the zinnias, but so you can wash them off and keep repeating that until you get control. So early detection is really key for thrips. Next, our next and last pest is whiteflies. So here are the whiteflies. They're not actually flies, they're actually true bugs. So they have nymphs. The nymphs are found on the underside of the leaves. They kind of look like scale almost. They're kind of nondescript, a little bit smaller than the adults. The adults do fly, and you will see them kind of creating clouds around your plants if you have too many of them. And they have sucking, piercing mouth parts. You're going to see stippling on the leaves. Check your plants before you bring them inside. So these are tropical pests, right? I actually just had infestation in my office a couple weeks ago. I had giant jump ups that I was growing inside, and I noticed some whiteflies around, and I turned the leaves over and they were just covered with all the nymphs. And so I just disposed of the plants to save all my other plants. You can, if you catch the infestation early, spray them off. But again, they do fly, so they're kind of jumping around. Cutting back the plant to get rid of all those nymphs, or getting rid of the plant might be your best option for whiteflies. They're pretty awful. but they are tropical. So if you have a plant that's a little more tolerant to cold, that can be a way of getting rid of them. So those are all of our pests. We have our aphids, fungus gnats, mealybugs, scale, spider mites, thrips, and whiteflies. Now you've noticed I have not said anything about using pesticides. So now is the time where I'm going to talk a little bit of pesticides, but that's not really a huge recommendation. So if you're going to use pesticides or insecticides specifically, make sure you correctly identify the pest, right? If you have something that, because on the label it'll say what you can use it for. So if you use something that's not on the label, it's not going to work. So make sure you read the label when you're in the store. Make sure it says, oh, I have thrips. This will work for thrips. There's different kinds. There's contact and systemic. So contact means that when you're spraying your plant, that you have to actually get the spray onto the insect or mite. Systemic is something that the plant uptakes and then will be in the plant cells. So when the insect or mite bites the plant, then it will be, affected by the insecticide. We do not recommend home remedies. There's lots of things out. A lot of people say use Dawn dish detergent. Well, detergents can really burn your plants, so we do not recommend using any home remedies. And if you're going to use insecticides, remember that the plants are sharing your airspace. So make sure you're using all the proper protective, the PPE, the protective equipment, so that you're protecting yourself, whether that's gloves, a dust, if you're using some kind of dust, make sure you're wearing a mask. And then also pay attention to the other inhabitants of your house, like your children or your pets. Do your pets lick your plants? Would you like to be putting an insecticide in your plant that the pet might lick off, or do your children play with your plants? Do you want them exposed to that? So before using, insecticides, it's really important to understand what you're doing and take the proper precautions. That's our program for today. We talked about lighting, watering, fertilizing, and pests.